Last week's parsha, we spoke about the Golim. Then when they traveled in the desert, they were camps in each direction, and each camp was comprised of three tribes. The first tribe that traveled was Yehuda, Yisachar, Zvulun. Yehuda is kingship. The king is the first to travel. And then the other three traveled, and in the center was the Machne Shechina, was the Mishkan. Encircling the Mishkan were the Leviim. Initially, who were meant to be the officiants, the equivalent of the Kohanim? The Bechorim, the firstborn. And therefore, since the firstborn were disqualified due to the Chet Egel, therefore they had to be redeemed. Because the firstborn, as the Torah says explicitly, during the moment of Max Bechoros, Hashem had taken them for himself. They were consecrated, and therefore they were not subject to the effect of the Max Bechoros, of the 10th plague. And over there, the Sefarno says they were consecrated to the point, just like as an animal. If you benefit from an animal after it was consecrated, there's Me'ilo. Identically, if they wouldn't have been redeemed, then you're not permitted to work with them or to do anything with them, because they're holy. So the Torah says, Hashem says, the Leviim, every Levi should redeem a Bechor. How many Leviim were there? The Leviim were counted from the age of 30 days and above. There were 22,000 Leviim. So for every Levi redeemed a Bechor. However, there were 273 additional Bechorim, which had to be redeemed with the five shkolim, the 5 silver coins, as one does Pidyon Aben. But there were 22,000 Leviim. These 22,000 Leviim at that moment, they encircled the Mishkan. The Mishkan is Machne Shechina, that's the camp of the divine presence. And encircling them was the Leviim. And then you had to each direction yet a Degel. Degel Machne Yehuda, Degel Machne Ruvain, the flag of Yehuda, Ruvain, Don, then you had Binyamin. But it's very interesting. Why were they Degolim? Firstly, it says, Rashi over there explains, cites the Medrash, that when Yaakov passed away and his children, they carried him from Mitzrayim to Canaan, to the Moras Machpelah to be buried. He designated which son should carry him on which side. So as his children carried him, each one representing the future tribes, in that formation, that's the way the camp traveled in the Midbar, in the desert. As Yaakov had designated it, who goes to the south, the east, the north, the west. Those children who carry them, those are the tribes who encircled the Shechina, not encircled, who were in every direction regarding the Shechina, the Machne Shechina, and the Leviim encircled the center camp. There are two things to discuss. The formation of the children carrying Yaakov, that was the formation they traveled regarding the Machne Shechina, the camp when they traveled. So you would say maybe because, whose merit did Klal Yisrael leave Mitzrayim? It says explicitly, in the merit of Yaakov Avinu. He fathered the 12 tribes. In his schus, we left Egypt. He spent his last 17 years of his life in Egypt. Yaakov. He established Klal Yisrael that he should be able to survive the Golus together with Yosef. Yosef was an extension of his father. Okay? Maybe that's understanding, which probably it's part of it. But at Kabbalah Torah, which we're approaching Shavuos, which we as is every Shavuos is a reenactment of that moment. What did Klaus said? Says the Shechina came to Sinai. The divine presence descended from heaven onto Sinai. The retinue of Malachim that accompanied Hashem were how many Malachim? There were 22,000 Malachim, angels, comprised of 4 camps. There were 4 camps of Malachim. One camp was represented by Michael, one was Raphael, one was Gabriel. There were 4 camps. And when the Klal Yisrael saw these Malachim coming with the Shechina and that level of association, it's something they desired. They wanted to have that level of association with the Shechina. They had that level of understanding of the value at Sinai. And that's when we said Nasa and Nishma during that period of time. So it's interesting. The number of Leviim were exactly 22,000, which corresponds to the 22,000 Malachim, which accompanied the Shechina to Sinai for Kabbalah Torah. And the Jews desired that, and the Malachim were 4 camps, 4 groups. Those 4 groups encircled the Shechina. Now, who's qualified to be at that level, to have that level of proximity to the Shechina? Only Shevet Levi. Because Levi were the only ones who were not tainted with the Chet Egel. So they could be in that proximity of the Shechina. They encircled, as these 4 camps of Malachim encircled the Shechina. The Leviim, they encircled the Mishkan, which is the Machne Shechina. But it's not coincidental. There were exactly 22,000 Leviim. There were 22,273 Bechorim. The number wasn't exact, meaning that ultimately it was meant to be that the Bechorim would not be the officiants of Hashem. They will not be the Kohanim. It's from Shevet Levi we have the Kohanim. And the Leviim are like an adjunct to Aaron Ubanov to do the service in the Mishkan, to do the service in the Beis HaMikdash. That's what it is. I'd once mentioned the name of Rabbeinu Bachya. It's a Parshas Vayigash that we all know. It's explicit that Yaakov was the Bechir Shebavos. He was the most special of the patriarchs. He was the only patriarch who was qualified to father the Shiftei Kor, as David HaMelech refers to them in Tehillim. They're the tribes of God, the Yud Bei Shvatim. And as the Maral says, 12 tribes received a portion of the land, but there were 13 tribes. Levi was the 13th tribe who did not receive a portion of the land. They could not be distracted with being involved in the mundane. They're fully dedicated to do the service in the Mishkan or the Beis HaMikdash. Therefore, the Levi did not receive a portion of the land. But as the Maral points out, there were 13 tribes, which gematria-wise, numerically wise, is Echad. And not only is it Echad in terms of number, even in gradation of Kedusha, of distinction, it's also Echad. Of who is the most spiritual of the 13? Was Shevet Levi. That's Aleph. How many Bnei Gviras were there? How many children were born to the matriarchs? 8. Rochel had 2 children. Leah had 6 children. And how many children were born to the concubines? Bilhah and Zilpah? 4. So not only in number are we Echad, 13, but it's Aleph Ches Dalet. So Aleph was always, Levi was always Aleph. If you remember, when they were born, It says, and his name was Levi. It doesn't say, normally the matriarchs, they named their children. Roch and Leah named all the children. It came to Levi, it says, and he was named Levi. So Rashi cites Chazal that Hashem had sent Gabriel, that since Levi ultimately was going to be the most spiritual of all the tribes, Hashem said, Gabriel named Levi. He was the one, because he was destined to be the most spiritual of all of them. So his name was not given by a mortal, it was given by Gabriel. It's interesting. Gabriel's meat is what? Is Malchadin, is the angel of fire. The Levi, the Kohen. They are the only ones who have relevance, who could represent Kapora, because they themselves did not participate in the Chet Egel. And because they did not participate, therefore, as advocates, they have the greatest ability to be the advocate for Klal Yisrael, to bring Kapora for us. Shevet Levi. Pinchas, although he was born a Levi, he was not a Kohen because he was the son of Aaron. The other children of Aaron, they were Kohanim because they were Bnei Aaron. Pinchas was a Kohen through his own initiative. As it says, we'll read when we come to Parshas Pinchas, because he was Kines Kinosi, he avenged my vengeance. I did not consume the Jewish people because he avenged my vengeance. He brought the kapora. So Pinchas, in his own right, what he did then, he brought atonement for Klal Yisrael. We should not be destroyed. As a result of that, he was qualified in his own right to be the Kohen, because he represents kapora. So Pinchas was a Kohen. He was a Levi. He was born a Levi, and he was born prior to his father being anointed to be the Kohen, but he was able to ascend to that level because in that capacity, as a Kanoi, as a Zealot, he brought Kapora. So therefore, the Levim are at that special level. The numbers, so therefore, initially, the Bechor was only a temporary situation. Ultimately, was destined that the Klal Yisrael should fail with the Chet Egel. As initially was destined that Od should eat of the Eitz Hadas, and the world should not start off in a state of perfection. He failed, and then it was waiting till Sinai. And against Sinai, we reverted back to pre-Chet of Adam Rishon. This is what happened. But as a result of Chet Egel and the breaking of the Luchos, we went post-sin. We were subject to death again. The Bchorim pre-Sinai were qualified. At Chet Egel, they were disqualified. Literally, it's like a repeat of Adam with Eitz Hadas. And now, as Atem Kurim Adam, we became Adam at Sinai. So although we were not disqualified as Adam, every Jew has the status of Adam, that we're able to advance ourselves. But that particular aspect, to have representation of Adam Kodem Achet, that's only the Levi. The Levi and the Kohen. But because they're part of Klal Yisrael, they were impacted and compromised because of the Chet Egel. But we had in last week's Parsha, when they were counted from the age of 30 days, not from the age of 20. Why? So Rashi cites the Chazal, because ultimately, since there was going to be a decree, as a result of Chetem Raglim, that anybody between the age of 20 and 60 will not enter into the land, they were considered Legion Shalmel. They were the God's legion. They were the legion of the king. So if the decree would come upon them, if they be counted as part of the total number, when the decree comes on that number, they're included. If they're included, they're not going to Eretz Yisrael. So because they were counted separately, therefore they were not impacted by that decree that anybody between the age of 20 and 60 is going to perish over the 40-year period. So therefore they were counted from the age of 30 days, not from the age of 20. They are the equivalent of the Malochim, just as the Maloch, and therefore the Malach, and therefore we find out who is the one responsible for the dissemination of Torah to Klal Yisrael. It's Shevet Levi. As when Moshe Rabbeinu gave the bracha to the Shvatim before he passed away, he says, Levi Omar. What did he say to Levi? Yoru Mishpatech Yaakov. They are responsible for disseminating Mishpatecha Yaakov. That is Levi. Because Levi himself was the tribe who were not initially tainted. They were only affected by the Chet Egel because they were part of Klal Yisrael. Being part of Klal is automatically diminished. Because the decree was on Klal Yisrael. Klal Yisrael failed. We reverted back to post-sin. Moshe Rabbeinu was affected. He was subject to death. Moshe Rabbeinu died. That was a consequence of the Chet Egel. Moshe Rabbeinu being part of Klal Yisrael, being the equivalent of Klal Yisrael, was impacted by the Chet Egel. Although he broke the Luchos, although he said, Mila Shem Eloi, whoever's for God should come with me, they killed the idolaters, doesn't make a difference. But when it came to the Chet HaMeraglim, because the Levim were counted separately, they represented 22,000 angels who encircled the Shekhinah when it came to Sinai. Therefore, in the Mishkan, so the Mishkan is replicating what happened at Sinai. The angels. Now, so Rabbeinu Bachya says, we find, what I mentioned in Parshas Vayigash is a little bit of a review, that Yaakov Avinu is literally a replication of the divine throne of Hashem. Why? He is Hashem's representation on the terrestrial level. He says, and he brings this name of the name of the Zohar, that we speak about the Kisei HaKavod, the holy throne of Hashem. It's encircled with four groups of Malachim, who encircle the Kisei HaKavod. The four groups are comprised together of 70 Malachim, 70. Yaakov Avinu had 4 wives. We say, B'shivim nefesh yordu avaseinu Mitzrayim. We went down to Egypt, we say in the Agora, we quote the Posuk, 70 souls went to Egypt. All these people, who did they emanate from? They emanated from Yaakov. They were his descendants. This is a replication of what? Of the heavenly retinue, the heavenly profile of the Shekhinah. Kisei HaKavod encircled with 70 Malachim, 4 groups. Where did they emanate from? They emanate from Hashem. He willed their existence. So he says, Rabbeinu Bachya, you can understand to what degree Yaakov was Ohov, was beloved more than all the patriarchs, that literally he's an exact replication of the Kisei HaKavod. That's Yaakov Avinu. That's how he was valued and what his level of representation was. We have Bnei Yisrael. Therefore, as a result of this, when Yaakov passed away and he was carried by his 12 sons, to bury him in Canaan, what was the formation? The exact formation that they had carried him, that's the formation of the 4 Machnos, who encircled as they traveled with the Shekhinah. Identically the same thing. It's literally a replication of that. We find, the Gemara tells us in 2 locations, that who was the host of the Shekhinah in the Holy of Holies? Binyamin. Binyamin, in the words of the Gemara, is referred to as Ushbezichne Shel Shekhinah. He was the host of the Shekhinah because the Oron, the Holy of Holies, was exactly in his portion. Now, why did he merit to be the Ushbezichne Shel Shekhinah? Because of all the 12 sons, he wanted more than any of them. It says, Chofifov of Kolayom. It's something, he pined for this. And because he pined for it to such a degree, therefore he merited to be the host of the Shekhinah. However, there's a Yalkut, which I once mentioned, it's the Yalkut at the very end of Zos HaBrocha, that why Did Binyamin merit to be the host of the Shekhinah? So we know Binyamin was the youngest son of Yaakov. He was Rachel's second child. She gave birth to him, and she passed away in childbirth. When Binyamin was raised, Yaakov already was an old man. And when he became an adult, he was even older. And Yaakov had difficulty walking. So he had to be supported. So when he would walk with Binyamin, Yaakov would lean on Binyamin's shoulder to assist him to walk. So the Yalkut says, the Medrash says, that because he was the one who supported Yaakov, and Yaakov leaned on him, therefore he merited to be the host of the Shekhinah, that the Shekhinah dwells in his portion. That's the Yalkut. So with the Rabbeinu Bach understanding who Yaakov is literally the representation of the Shekhinah on the terrestrial level. In every sense of the word. As a result of that, if Yaakov leans on Binyamin's shoulder, that's the equivalent of the Shekhinah leaning on Yaakov's shoulder. As a result of that, in that merit on the terrestrial level, who is the host of the Shekhinah? Binyamin, his portion, that's where the Aron and the Holy of Holies dwells. Now, there's a Ramban, which we once mentioned, when Yaakov fell asleep on the Har Moriah, when he was fleeing from Esav to go to Choron. It says there was a ladder which stood on the ground and went into heaven. And there were angels ascending, descending, and it says, Vashem Omid Olov. And God stood on top of the ladder. So the Ramban says, when Hashem stood on top of the ladder, there's a pasuk in Tehillim that Malachim Yishmor Loch. Angels protect tzaddikim, protect. If you're a special Jew, the angels protect you. Hashem said to Yaakov, from that moment going forward, he doesn't need angel to protect him. The reason why he's in a protected state, Ushmorani, is because Hashem says, you with me. The level of attachment from that moment going forward, the Ramban writes, he no longer needed Malachim to protect him, even though he was accompanied by Malachim. But that wasn't for protection. That was out of respect because of his level of representation. But Hashem Omid Olav by the Sulam, by the ladder, you take a look at the Ramban, from that time on, Hashem says, you need no Malach to protect you. That's the level of relationship we have. So again, so who is Yaakov? Yaakov is because of that, he is the representation of the Shekhinah. Therefore, Binyamin, supporting him as he walked, he was the host of the Shekhinah on the terrestrial level, Yaakov being the representation of that reality. The 70 souls correspond. We are the counterforce to the world. We are 71, right? We always speak about 70 being natural. 71 is beyond the natural. We're the 71st nation, right? The 70 root nations, Klaus says 71. We're not within that classification. Yaakov is 71. 70 emanated from Yaakov. The totality is what? Is 71. From Yaakov, we had 70. And it's stated explicitly, we are the counterforce. We are 70 to counter the world. We are the representation of Kedusha. If you take a look in the Orach Chaim, in Parshas Hazinu, over there he writes about the 70. There's a posting that says, Yaakov Chevel Nachloso. Yaakov is the Chevel of his Nachlo, is the extension of the Nachlo, of the portion. So over there he brings the Zohar that Yaakov's soul was so pure, and because of the purity of his soul, he was able to achieve what he did, and he was able to father the 12 tribes, which ultimately manifest himself as 70. We went to Egypt at 70, the Sat 70 represented the Klal Yisrael, which ultimately would be the 600,000 males above the age of 20 leaving Egypt to go to Sinai. That was within that 70. That was that representation of 70. And
So in the
it's interesting that Yocheved was the 70th person to be born, child, as they passed through the walls. The number 70 had to be in place before we went into Egypt itself. Egypt was the Korah Barzel. That was the crucible. That we had to undergo that period of expungement of evil for that 70, for the 210-year period. That number had to be there. It didn't happen in Egypt. It happened to happen to pre-Egypt. Even though Yosef and Yosef's children were born in Egypt, Yosef was a level that just as Yaakov was unaffected by Egypt, identically, Yosef being the equivalent of his father, his children, although they were born in Egypt, it's like they were born somewhere else. Like Yaakov's children, although they were born in Choron, he was able to create an insular environment that Choron had no relevance to his children. Identically, Yosef, being the equivalent of his father, being the Aish, being the Lahava, he was the flame of that fire. He was able to create that insular environment that Binyamin, Menashe, and Ephraim were able to be the equivalent, and that's why they were tribes. Ephraim, Menashe, Keruvim, Shimon. Ephraim and Menashe are the equivalent of Reuben and Shimon for that reason.
and so just to make sure I understand, so at Sinai there was the Kisei Kavod had 70 Malachim.
No. When he came to Sinai, there were 22,000 malachim.
22,000.
In heaven, the Kisei HaKovod in Shemayim, heaven, whatever that celestial level is, there are 4 groups of malachim which encircle the heavenly throne, and it's all 70 in total, 70, the 4 groups.
Rabbi, I have a question.
Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe Lemor, Tzavis b'nei Yisrael, Vishalchu bin Amachne. You should send out of the camp called Tzarua. Person's a leper, Cholzov. Person has a flow called Tomid Lenefesh. And a person who was contaminated with the dead. Let's see Rashi. Tzavis b'nei Yisrael, Parshu Nemra b'yom shehukam Mishkan. This parsha was said when the Mishkan was erected, took on the permanent status. Ushmona parshas nemer bo b'yom k'dis v'echus. Okay, v'yishaltu min hamachner. They have to be sent out of the machner. Sholosh machnos ho yusham b'shas ben Yosef. When they would camp and the Mishkan was erected, we had 3 camps. Tocha kloim. Within the Kloim, which is equivalent of, that's the inner part of the Beis Hamikdash. That was the Mishkan. The curtains, Kloim means the curtains, was Machne Shechina. Chanias Leviim Soviv, the encirclement of the Leviim around that, Moshe Mfurish Parshas B'midbar Sinai, he Machne Leviyah. That's the camp of the Leviim. And from that point, from the edge of the Machne Leviyah, going out to the encampment of the Golim, he Machne Yisrael. That's classified as Machne Yisrael, the camp of Israel. Hatzarua, if a person was a leper, the Shalech Chutz L'Kuban. He has to be sent out of all the camps. Hazov Mutar Machne Yisrael, person has a flow. He's permitted to be Machne Yisrael. He has to be sent out from the Machne Shechina and from the Machne Leviyah. The Tommy, the person is contaminated with the dead. Mutar Af B'Shel Leviyah. He's permitted to be in the Machne Leviyah. Ve'en Meshulach Elam Shel Shechina. That person cannot enter into the Machne Shechina, can't go into the Mishkan, the Azora, the sanctuary. The Gemara tells us, it says the Atzmos Yosef, the remains of Yosef with who? With Moshe Rabbeinu. Now, Moshe Rabbeinu was which machne? Was machne Leviah. So from there we see that if you could have the remains of Yosef there, that means Tomei Mess is permitted to be there. Because Moshe Rabbeinu was the equivalent of machne Leviah. That's where he was. His camp was the camp of Leviah. But it's interesting. The Mitzorah is sent out of all the camps. He's considered persona non grata. He's the ultimate pariah. Now, what is tzoras? We mentioned a corpse contaminates. If you're under the same roof with the remains of a Jew, you're contaminated. If you're under the same roof with a person who's a Mitzorah, who's classified as Mitzorah by the pronouncement of the Kohen, he contaminates, identically the same. Tumas Mes is a result of what? Of the Chet of Adam Rishon. Right? Death came upon mankind. That was the evil of the Eitz Hadas that's brought about death. The Mitzorah is Metame, exact like a mess, except he's worse than a mess. The Mitzorah is a Mitzorah because he himself perpetrated certain things, he crossed certain lines too many times. He became the Mitzorah. He recreated the equivalent of what? Which was the Chet of Adam. Therefore, as Adam was driven out of the Gan Eden, the Mitzorah is driven out of Klal Yisrael. Klal Yisrael is the Gan Eden, is the equivalent of that is the infrastructure of the Gan Eden in this world. The three camps. He goes out of even the third camp. Until he recovers, he's not permitted to re-enter. And the only reason why he could re-enter, Adam couldn't re-enter because he couldn't re-enter because he was everything. And once he became disqualified, he's persona non grata. He was disenfranchised. Here we're talking about he's an individual. He's persona non grata as an individual. Once he recovers, he returns to his roots, and therefore he re-enters. He's re-entering into something which he's connected to. But when he's a Mitzorah, he's sent out of all the camps.
There's a question, Rabbi, or no?
Sure.
Is